Greetings, everyone. In these vlogs, I tend to speak to the future, and sometimes I speak narrowly in terms of the future of higher education, the field where I work and where I study. Sometimes I speak more broadly about the future of human civilization as a whole. Tonight, I want to speak about the future of higher ed, and with a particular angle. So to give you a little backstory, for more than a year, I've been working on trying to prepare academia for a second Trump administration. I've done all kinds of things. I've hosted exercises online, scenarios, what to do if Trump wins. I've been blogging nonstop, including blogging Project 2025. Some of you know I've done a series of vlogs about this, and so I've been trying to do my part. Trump won, and now he's starting to stock his cabinet and prepare for power, and already making noises in a way which indicates he's trying to exercise that power. So that's background for a very interesting meeting I had a couple of days ago. This was an invitation-only meeting. It was held by a group of elite Ivy League institutions. And in this meeting, which is small enough to fit in a room, we had presidents of elite institutions from the Ivies. We had reporters from New York Times, Washington Post, the New Yorker. We had faculty from Ivy League institutions. We had some think tankers. This is in Washington, D.C., so we had lots of good people from think tanks that came up with policy. We had people from the association world, that is nonprofit organizations that work across higher education. And it was a very, very good conversation overall. We had a lot of good ideas, very thoughtful people, some very powerful researchers involved. And I kept coming back to this phrase as I was in this meeting, mostly listening, and that is brace for impact. That higher education is now in this unenviable spot. We are in a kind of defensive crouch waiting for what Trump 2.0 will do. And there's a lot of mystery, a lot of uncertainty. And this group tried to claw through that uncertainty and tried to come up with some ideas. I wanted to share some of the themes and points that came up during that. Now, we held this meeting to a degree under Chatham House rules, so I'm not going to quote anybody. These are distillations of hours of conversation. One topic that came up quite a bit was the sense, some of these are not going to surprise you, is that academic government relations are the worst they've been in decades. In fact, one presenter said they're as bad as they have been since 1970. For those of you historically minded, or those of you older in the audience, you might think about the Kent State and Jackson State murders. I think that comparison is a good spur for thinking, and that's what drove a lot of our conversation. Another theme was that there's a great split in higher ed. So it's just worth remembering that American higher education has roughly 4,000 institutions plus vocational technology institutions. And those 4,000 are astonishingly diverse. I mean, it's one of the great glories, I think, of American higher education, that we have so many different types of institutions: research universities, community colleges, state universities, liberal arts colleges, technical institutions, military schools, public, private. I mean, it's a real astonishing array. And in our discussion about that, we really focused first on elite institutions, so say the top 1%. And then that swiftly became a divide where we realized and talked through the gap between that 1% and the rest of higher education. That gap also had echoes in another gap between institutions and faculty predominantly focused on research versus those predominantly focused on teaching. Again, this isn't news, but it's worth noting that this is part of the framework by which we approached the oncoming Trump administration. One idea that came up as a result was that higher ed has to make a better case for itself, that it has to explain what it does, that it has to create a better, more positive picture of itself among state lawmakers, federal lawmakers, the population as a whole. But with that, we have to listen more closely, that we have to listen to the people who fear and despise us, that we have to listen to people who don't want to fund more state funding for higher education, for example. There's also related to this a sense that higher education isn't very transparent, in particular about our finances. So most of the time the public knows, for example, the sticker price that's published, and that's often seen through the media as the top sticker price. And so we don't often hear about lower cost institutions, and we also almost never hear about the huge discounting that goes on, especially the net tuition discount rate. Uh, just overall, my sense from this group was a lot of anxiety and even dread about a second Trump administration among the academics there. Again, that's not a surprise, but it's worth noting, especially among the elite Ivies, who in many ways are the best in the best defensive position than anybody else in higher ed. Now, a key theme that came up again and again builds on events that have happened over the past few years, notably the spectacular congressional hearing of university presidents, which ended with ending two of their tenures. And that was the question about how to think about academic freedom. And the group had swirled around this. We talked about freedom of speech versus academic freedom. We talked about the tension between First Amendment rights, so in the United States that's freedom of speech, versus Title VI, which is that students and other academics have the right to be free from intimidation. And so that tension seemed unresolved, and we didn't have a consensus on it in the room, but we also didn't see that academia as a whole had a consensus on that. There's also, curiously, no agreement on what is academic knowledge versus what counts as ideology. So, we think about the kind of the standard case of a professor teaching a subject X, but then uses the classroom to opine about political topic Y. And there's an interesting question about when topic Y is clearly separated from that from their body of work versus when it actually is an integral part. Along with this, I'm trained always to look for what's not spoken and what's not on the table. And I was curious about things that were either not talked about at all or things that were soft-pedaled or didn't get as much attention. We didn't speak very much about DEI, which kind of surprised me because that's a major attack of the new Republican administration. If you go through Project 2025, DEI is as bad a villain as China, or as Project 2025 says, the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party. And we talked a little bit about DEI offices on campus, differential access to higher education by race and by class. It might be that higher education is trying to just downplay DEI as a whole right now in order to lower our head below the parapet so we don't get shot as often. Nobody talked about technology. Technology just didn't come up, in any way. So we didn't really talk about some of the interesting communication strategies that might be unfolding now as we think about, did Trump succeed in the election in part because he relied so much on social media and podcasts? We didn't talk about online teaching. Again, these were Ivy League institutions. So thinking of wholly online classes and institutions, wholly online or mostly online, like Western Governors University or something like Hampshire University, that didn't really appear. I showed up to talk about AI, and nobody was very interested in that, which surprised me because it might be that this is an area where the Trump administration ends up supporting AI. Now, again, what the Trump administration does so much depends on the combination of what Trump is paying attention to, which is often derived from who's yelled at him most recently and what he's seen on TV, and also what his shambolic administration actually gets around to doing. But it might be that his administration really supports AI. And it'd be interesting to see what happens to the parts of academia that also support AI. Is that a point of connection? I also raised climate change. Some of you know this has been a major interest of mine for several years now, subject of my most recent book, University is on Fire. And that didn't play a role. I did ask people to think about what would happen about academics trying to do climate work on campus under a Trump administration that's fiercely anti-climate, and we didn't get very far with that. Um, so what lessons do I draw from this? Again, I think this is a sketch of a group that is bracing for impact, that they see the Trump administration as an oncoming threat, and a threat hitting in multiple ways. I mean, we talked about a lot of the usual topics. So we talked about endowment taxes, for example. We talked about cutting federal money, and that can be, grants, for example. We talked about some of the accreditation issues. Um, we didn't talk much about the knock-on effects on academia of non-academic policies. For example, if Trump manages to start his mass deportation, how does that play out on a campus where you have undocumented people, for example? Um, I again, just to conclude, this felt like a defensive posture. Uh, this felt like a group of people who are very nervous, very anxious, um, and I'm not sure where they go next. In fact, I'm not sure how academia proceeds now. Uh, Beyond us, the Democratic Party is in many ways being pretty quiet. There's a lot of behind closed doors maneuvering, a lot of wound licking, a lot of second guessing, a lot of directing the blame cannons, as some say. But for higher education, it's a real open question. I've been working on this, like I said, for quite some time. Uh, I hope I've given people some ground to stand upon and to work from. Um, but again, we're meeting this incredible challenge, I think, and right now we're bracing for its impact. I hope everybody's well, and please leave your thoughts and comments below.